Welcome to The Deep Dive. This is the show where we really journey into the heart of these monumental texts, trying to unearth their most potent insights and offer you, well, a unique shortcut to being truly well-informed about the works that have profoundly shaped how we think. Today, we're embarking on I think, a truly profound exploration. We're looking at one of the cornerstones of Western literature, philosophy, and theology, Augustine's Confessions.
A massive undertaking.
It really is. Now, when you hear ancient texts, maybe your mind conjures up images of, dusty tomes and archaic prose. But let me assure you, this is anything but.
Definitely not.
This isn't just some historical account from centuries past.
Yeah.
It's deeply personal, it's raw, and it's an astonishingly introspective journey into one man's relentless search for truth, for God, and really for the very meaning of existence.
Yeah, he really does lay bare his soul, his struggles, his doubts, his ultimate revelations. It's done in a way that just resonates, doesn't it, with universal human experiences. That makes it feel timeless, intensely relevant.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to try and extract his most important nuggets of knowledge, the insights into his personal battles, his profound philosophical reflections on existence, and his kind of evolving understanding of God, sin, memory, time, all of it.
Right. We want to get at not just what he said, but what it might mean for us, today.
Exactly.
And what's truly fascinating here is how Augustine, in this groundbreaking work, he really pioneered a level of introspection that was, well, almost unheard of in his era.
Right. Before this, autobiographies were mostly about, external stuff.
Pretty much. External achievements, public deeds, that kind of thing. Augustine just fundamentally shifted that paradigm. He invites us to look inward, not just at his story, but at our own internal landscapes to understand the outward world and our intricate relationship with the divine. This deep dive into his inner life makes his struggles just profoundly relatable, even centuries later. It really is a revolutionary approach, not just to autobiography, but to the very act of self-discovery. Yeah. It shaped how we've thought about the self and personal narrative ever since.
Absolutely. So, okay, let's begin by immersing ourselves in Augustine's early life and those intense worldly desires that so vividly defined his youth. Because from the very beginning, you see the seeds of faith were planted, right? But they wrestled fiercely with some powerful temptations.
Indeed. Augustine recounts being, and this is his phrase, sealed with the mark of his cross and salted with his salt, right from his mother's womb.
Wow.
Yeah, and this isn't just a casual detail. It underscores his early, almost innate connection to Christian faith, thanks mostly to his devout mother, Monica.
Monica, yeah. Such a key figure.
Huge. However, there's a critical incident in his childhood that sets up this fascinating tension. His baptism was deferred after a sudden illness. He recovered, but the baptism was postponed because there was this widespread belief at the time, a fear, really, that if he were cleansed of sin through baptism and then sinned again, the guilt would be, quote, greater and more perilous.
That's such an illuminating detail, isn't it? It immediately highlights this profound tension, this push and pull between an inherited faith, a spiritual birthright from his mother, and the very practical, almost, you could say, superstitious considerations of the era regarding sacraments.
Exactly. It sets the stage perfectly for his lifelong struggle with sin and his eventual hard-won understanding of grace.
And you see his mother, Monica, just so deeply invested in his spiritual well-being, desiring that thou, my God, rather than he shouldest be my father, contrasting really sharply with his actual father's focus, which was purely on Augustine's worldly advancement.
Precisely. And this deferral of baptism wasn't actually that uncommon in the 4th century. Lots of people believed it was wiser to put off baptism until later in life, maybe even the deathbed, to ensure fewer post-baptismal sins, a cleaner slate before God.
Right, makes a certain kind of practical, if fearful, sense.
Yeah, but for Augustine looking back, it became this vivid early example of the deep chasm that often existed between the theoretical ideal of a faith and the practical, often fear-driven choices people made. And it also speaks volumes about the enduring influence of Monica. Her deep, unwavering faith actively shaped his early spiritual landscape, even when he was, miles away from embracing it himself. She was like this constant loving pressure towards virtue that he later recognized as divine providence.
Now, you really can't talk about Augustine's early life without zeroing in on the notorious pear theft. This seemingly minor incident when he was 16, it became just a pivotal moment in his self-reflection. offers a truly profound psychological insight into the nature of sin itself.
Oh, it's one of the most famous and, frankly, psychologically probing episodes in Confessions for a very good reason. Augustine recounts stealing pears from a neighbor's tree. Okay, simple enough.
Yeah, sounds like typical teenage stuff.
But the crucial detail, the part that truly haunted him and forced him to confront the depths of his own will, was why he did it. He didn't do it out of hunger or need. He explicitly states he had store of better pears at home.
Right, that's the kicker.
Exactly. Instead, he says, my only feast therein being my own sin, which I was pleased to enjoy.
Wow. That phrase, my only feast therein being my own sin, it's chilling in its honesty, isn't it? It wasn't about the object, the pears, but the perverse delight in the act of transgression itself, the sheer act of doing evil for its own sake.
Mm-hmm.
It's an early, really raw exploration of what we might call malice, or maybe a disordered will. What does this tell us, really, about, the human capacity for irrational self-sabotage, or that strange, almost magnetic allure of forbidden acts, even when there's absolutely no material gain?
It forces us to confront a, let's say, discomforting truth about human nature. Augustine is grappling here with the concept of a will that actively chooses evil, not as a means to some other perceived good like, say, stealing because you're hungry, or for profit, but for the thrill of the transgression itself.
Just for the sake of it.
Just for the sake of it. This sin for sin's sake reveals, in his view, a deep spiritual sickness. It's a twisting of the natural human desire for good into a perverse enjoyment of its opposite.
It makes you think, doesn't it? It forces us to consider that maybe not all wrongdoings are pragmatic. Some seem born of a desire for chaos or a warped sense of power, or maybe just the perverse satisfaction of breaking a rule.
Right. And you wonder, are we all maybe just a few steps away from finding some kind of feast in our own transgressions, however small, whether it's, online trolling or petty gossip or even self-sabotaging behavior where that perverse satisfaction seems to outweigh any logical gain.
And the role of his companions in this act is just as illuminating, isn't it? Reveals another layer of human behavior. He emphasizes, alone, I had never done it.
Yeah, that's crucial.
The shared sport, the tickle of deceiving others, it amplified the pleasure. He even admits he made myself worse than I was, that I might not be dispraised by his peers. This collective dynamic is critical. It underscores how sin, or really any moral transgression, isn't always just an isolated act of individual will. Social pressure, the desire for acceptance, maybe even just the shared thrill of doing something forbidden, it can lower inhibitions and create this destructive synergy.
It's a stark reminder of how our actions are so often compounded or maybe even enabled by group dynamics and peer validation. Augustine offers this stark mirror to a very common human tendency.
Yeah, that seemingly irrational pursuit of transgression. In what ways might we see echoes of this sin for sin's sake in our own lives, even in less dramatic forms?
Yeah.
Maybe driven by the desire to fit in or just for the thrill of going against the grain?
Well, and that admission of making himself worse than I was.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful confession of how much outward appearance and social standing can warp inner truth.
Definitely.
It highlights the performative aspect of so much human behavior, doesn't it? Where our identity is kind of negotiated and sometimes distorted within a social context. This observation feels remarkably contemporary, speaks to the pressures of conformity, the allure of peer group acceptance, and how readily individuals might compromise their own moral compass just for the sake of belonging.
Yeah.
Augustine's honesty really forces us to look at the subtle ways we might still seek praise for actions we know deep down are not our best.
Okay, so moving on from those early mischiefs and this profound self-reflection, Augustine then describes his arrival in Carthage, a vibrant, bustling city, but he vividly portrays it as being immersed in a cauldron of unholy loves.
That's a powerful image.
It is, and he famously states, I loved not yet I love to love, which I think truly encapsulates his deep-seated desire for affection and connection, but one that was, well, utterly misdirected. It led him into what he calls the muddy concupiscence of the flesh, which beclouded and overcast my heart that I could not discern the clear brightness of love from the fog of lustfulness.
Yeah, this section offers a really harrowing depiction of his early adulthood's moral confusion. And when he uses that term concupiscence, it's more than just, simple lust.
Right. It's deeper than that.
For Augustine, concupiscence of the flesh means this kind of disordered craving, an intense and often misguided desire for earthly pleasures and sensual gratification that pulls the soul away from higher spiritual goods. He recognized that his soul became sickly and full of sores, miserably casting itself forth and desiring to be scraped by the touch of objects of sense.
Wow, scraped by the touch of objects of sense. What imagery.
It is. This hunger for external, fleeting gratification rather than inward, enduring truth just left him feeling empty, bruised, and perpetually dissatisfied.
And Augustine doesn't just say, I made bad choices in love. He dives deep into the why. Why did he find pleasure in things that ultimately brought him sorrow? He shows the inherent emptiness of seeking fulfillment in perishable things. He longed to enjoy the person I loved, but instead he says he was scourged with the iron-burning rods of jealousy and suspicions and fears and angers and quarrels.
Yeah, the consequences were brutal.
And he saw these painful consequences as God's mercifully rigorous scourges, demonstrating how unlawful pleasures are inherently alloyed with bitterness, and that this bitterness was ultimately meant to guide him back to true, unalloyed joy. This really underscores his later understanding of divine providence, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic Augustinian paradox.
Yeah.
The very bitterness and suffering he experienced in these disordered loves was, looking back, a form of divine mercy. It was designed to turn him away from false goods toward the true good. He's identifying a fundamental truth about human nature. When we seek ultimate fulfillment in finite things, those things inevitably disappoint us, even wound us. The iron-burning rods aren't just random consequences. They are, in his theological framework, an invitation, however painful, to a deeper, more authentic love, a path to real peace that just cannot be found in fleeting sensory pleasures.
It's a profound lesson, really, in the inherent unsatisfying nature of anything less than ultimate truth.
Definitely.
And this moral confusion wasn't just limited to his personal life, right? It extended deeply into his education and the whole cultural environment he inhabited. Augustine bitterly laments what he calls the torrent of human custom in the educational system of his youth.
Yeah, he is quite critical.
He points out how the venerated literature of the day glorified pagan gods committing adultery, implying that, crimes might be no longer crimes if deities engaged in them. He openly admits preferring empty poetic fictions like tales of the burning of Troy over more profitable studies like, basic arithmetic.
Stepping back a bit, this critique of education really highlights a recurring tension, doesn't it? One that transcends Augustine's time and resonates with, contemporary debates about media and culture even today.
How so?
Well, Augustine is drawing this stark contrast between valuing superficial eloquence and embracing genuine truth and virtue. He's questioning the very foundations of what society deems valuable learning. He's highlighting how cultural narratives, even through revered literature, can subtly warp our moral compass and actually hinder genuine intellectual and moral development.
Right. And he notes the irony that he was often bepraised for eloquent speech, even when it served to relate a disordered life. It was all about the rhetorical skill, not the moral substance.
Exactly. It was style over substance.
So he's pointing out the danger of prioritizing that style over substance, of eloquence without virtue. He gives that vivid example of Jove, the thunderer and adulterer, and remarks, quote, "So the feigned thunder might countenance and pander to real adultery." He asks, which of our gowned masters lends a sober ear to one who from their own school cries out, "These were Homer's fictions, transferring things human to the gods. Would he had brought down things divine to us." He even goes further, saying, "More truly had he said, these are indeed his fictions, but attributing a divine nature to wicked men, that crimes might be no longer crimes, and whoso commits them might seem to imitate not abandoned men, but the celestial gods."
That's a powerful indictment.
It is. And this intellectual and moral dissatisfaction, this longing for something more substantive, more true, it directly propels him to seek truth in different philosophical schools. It starts his more serious spiritual and intellectual wandering. It's almost like he's on a quest for an educational system that genuinely cultivates virtue, not just rhetoric.
It's a powerful indictment, as you said, of cultural relativism in morality, especially when it's cloaked in aesthetic appeal or intellectual prestige. Augustine saw how the veneration of classical literature, despite its pagan immorality, led young minds to accept or even glorify vice under the guise of intellectual pursuit. This intellectual and moral void became a driving force, pushing him beyond the superficial into a quest for a more coherent and truthful understanding of existence. He desperately needed a framework where good was unequivocally good, and truth was unassailable rather than just, a mere narrative construct.
Which brings us to his deep intellectual and spiritual crossroads. He starts grappling with fundamental questions about God, evil, and the very nature of knowledge itself. And a significant chapter in this journey, nearly 9 years, was his entanglement with Manichaeism.
Right, Manichaeism.
Yeah.
For almost 9 years, Augustine was deeply drawn to this. It was a dualistic religious movement founded by the prophet Mani. It proposed this cosmic struggle between two equally powerful co-eternal forces, a good spiritual realm of light and an evil material realm of darkness.
Dualism. Okay, so two opposing forces.
Exactly. And Augustine was initially impressed by its smooth language, its promise of knowledge. It claimed to offer rational answers to life's deepest questions, which really appealed to his intellect.
Understand.
During this period, he conceived of God in very corporeal terms. He imagined God as a vast and bright body, and himself as a fragment of that body. This reflected a materialistic, almost tangible understanding of spiritual things that Manichaeism unfortunately reinforced.
So God was like a physical substance to him then?
Pretty much, yeah. A vast luminous substance diffused through space. He even admitted, looking back, that he blushed not then to profess to men my blasphemies and to bark against thee, meaning God, in his zealous defense of their teachings.
9 years is a remarkably long time to be under the sway of that belief system, especially for someone with his intellectual firepower. It really shows his intense intellectual and spiritual hunger, doesn't it?
Absolutely. He was searching desperately for a system that could explain the world and the nature of God in a way that felt concrete, tangible, even if it turned out to be, well, misleading.
But his disillusionment eventually set in. What was the catalyst for that intellectual break? What made him question it?
It did, and it famously came to a head with a renowned Manichaean bishop named Faustus. Augustine had long awaited a meeting with Faustus, hoping the celebrated leader would resolve the many intellectual difficulties and contradictions he was starting to find in Manichaean teachings, especially concerning, say, astronomy and science.
Ah, the details.
Exactly. However, he found that despite Faustus's pleasing discourse and obvious eloquence, he lacked true substantive knowledge, particularly in those areas like astronomy and other liberal sciences where the Manichees claimed special insight.
So the rhetoric was good, but the substance wasn't there.
Precisely. This experience was critical because it exposed the superficiality of Manichaean claims to comprehensive knowledge, and it taught Augustine a vital lesson. Neither ought anything to seem to be spoken truly because eloquently, nor therefore falsely because the utterance of the lips is inharmonious.
Basically, don't judge a book by its cover or an argument by its speaker's eloquence.
Exactly. He learned to distinguish genuine wisdom from mere rhetorical flourish, realizing that intellectual elegance did not equate to truth.
And this intellectual turning point, this disillusionment, brought him face to face with one of the most tormenting questions in philosophy and theology, the problem of evil. He describes his intense, deeply personal struggle with the question, whence is evil?
Yeah, a huge question.
Initially, still bound by his Manichaean past, he struggled with that dualistic view, imagining evil as a separate, unknown substance, a powerful, opposing force not derived from a good God. He simply couldn't even conceive of mind unless as a subtle body, which made it incredibly difficult to grasp a non-physical source of either evil or good.
And this marks a critical turning point, not just for him, but arguably for Western thought on the matter. His Manichaean worldview ultimately faltered precisely because it couldn't reconcile an all-good, all-powerful God with the existence of evil as a co-equal, independent substance.
Right. It creates a fundamental contradiction.
It does. And it raises that important question for all of us. How can an all-good, all-powerful God exist if evil is a real, co-equal substance, constantly battling against the good? Augustine's journey here forces him to redefine evil itself, not as a positive substance or a force on par with God, but as a privation, a lack, a corruption of good.
A privation, like an absence. That's a huge conceptual leap, a paradigm shift in understanding evil.
It really is. He came to this profound realization, all which is corrupted is deprived of good. He argues that if something were entirely evil, it would cease to exist altogether because existence itself is a good derived from God.
Okay, so even evil things have some good in them just by existing.
In his view, yes. Therefore, he says, if they shall be deprived of all good, they shall no longer be. So long, therefore, as they are good. Therefore, whatsoever is good. This leads him to his powerful conclusion that evil then, which I sought, is not any substance. He realized that God madest all things good, and their inequality or imperfection doesn't make some things inherently evil, but contributes to the goodness of the whole, making the whole creation very good.
That conceptual breakthrough must have been immense. It allowed him to reconcile divine goodness with the undeniable presence of evil and suffering in the world. A struggle, let's be honest, many people still grapple with today.
It offers a profound shift in perspective that really underpins much of Western theology and philosophy concerning evil ever since. Instead of seeing evil as this active, opposing force on par with good, he understood it as a deficit, a lack of goodness in something that is good by its very nature because it was created by God.
Can you give an analogy?
Sure. Think of it like a hole in a garment. The hole is a substance itself, right? It's the absence of fabric in a garment that is a substance. Or think of blindness. You're not a positive entity, but the absence of sight in an eye that should see.
Okay, that helps. Evil as absence, not presence.
Exactly. This insight was foundational. It fundamentally shifted how he and later much of Western thought reconciled God's goodness with suffering and moral failings. He allowed for a non-dualistic monotheism.
And this refined understanding of evil naturally led to an equally significant shift in how he understood God himself. He began to move beyond those corporeal, physical forms entirely, towards a more abstract, spiritual conception of the divine.
Yes, this was heavily influenced by Bishop Ambrose in Milan. Ambrose's eloquent sermons really helped him grapple with the complexities of Christian doctrine, and later by reading books of the Platonists, Neoplatonism basically, which posited a transcendent spiritual realm and offered a powerful framework for an incorporeal spiritual reality.
So Platonism helped him think beyond the physical.
Immensely. Through these influences, Augustine began to conceive of God as an incorruptible, uninjurable, and unchangeable spiritual substance. Crucially, God was not bounded by human shape or diffused infinitely in space, like the Manichaeans thought. He found immense joy and intellectual relief in this new understanding, realizing his earlier barking against God was actually against the fictions of carnal imaginations.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think, because he's battling his own ingrained imagination, isn't he? Trying to grasp a concept of God that isn't confined to what his eyes or even his intellect, which was so habituated to physical forms, could easily grasp. It's like a fundamental rewiring of his understanding of reality itself.
Absolutely. He struggled intensely with it because, as he says, whatsoever I conceived, deprived of this space, seemed to mean nothing. How do you think about something that takes up no space?
Yeah, it's hard to picture.
But he had to acknowledge that the mind itself, the thing doing the conceiving and forming images, is not a corporeal form, yet he could think about non-corporeal things like truth or justice.
Ah, so his own mind was proof that non-physical reality exists.
In a way, yes. This intellectual struggle was immense, requiring a complete reevaluation of how he understood existence. To move from a material, almost spatial conception of God to an incorporeal, immutable spirit was a radical paradigm shift for him.
And he describes hearing a voice.
Yes, he describes hearing a voice from on high saying, I am the food of grown men, grow, and thou shalt feed upon me, nor shalt thou convert me like the food of thy flesh into thee, but thou shalt be converted into me.
Wow, that's powerful. God isn't consumed, but transforms the consumer.
Exactly. It wasn't just an auditory thing. It was an internal revelation of God's nature. Not something to be consumed and changed by him, but something that would change him. He also heard, reflecting on Scripture, yet verily I am that I am, affirming God's immutable, eternal being. And he realized truth is not, which is clearly seen, being understood by those things which are made, meaning God's truth isn't just derived from creation, it's the eternal ground for it.
Okay. This spiritual and intellectual breakthrough really prepared him for even deeper internal change, didn't it? And these profound reflections on the nature of the mind itself.
It did. But before fully embracing Christian faith, there was another phase. He spent a period aligning himself with the academics, the skeptics.
The skeptics, what did they believe?
Well, they were philosophers who, stemming from Plato's Academy in its later phases, held men on to doubt everything and laid down that no truth can be comprehended by man. Basically, radical skepticism.
So after leaving the dogma of Manichaeism, he swung towards doubting everything. That sounds like an intellectual pit stop on his journey.
It was a crucial phase, actually. This period represents his deep intellectual uncertainty and his disillusionment with previous dogmatic systems like Manichaeism. Having found those wanting and not yet fully accepting the Catholic Church's teachings either, he gravitated towards this position of radical skepticism. It shows his relentless pursuit of certainty, even if that path initially led him through profound doubt and a refusal to commit to any single truth claim. He confessed he held his intimacy with Manichaeism more laxly and carelessly, but remained slow to seek another way because he despaired of finding the truth in thy church. It was a period of intellectual wandering, trying desperately to find some stable ground for knowledge in a world that seemed full of conflicting claims.
This relentless intellectual journey eventually led him to a deep exploration of the human mind itself, particularly the vast and mysterious landscape of memory. Augustine dedicates an entire book of confessions to this book X, and what he uncovers is truly remarkable. It feels like it prefigures modern psychology by over a millennium.
Oh, absolutely. He describes memory using these incredible metaphors, fields and spacious palaces, filled with treasures of innumerable images brought in by the senses from external experiences.
Palaces of memory. I like that.
Yeah. But it's far more than just a simple storage unit for sensory data. He states that in memory, he encounters heaven, earth, sea, and whatever I could think on therein. And crucially, he adds, there also meet I with myself, and recall myself, and when, where, and what I have done, and under what feelings.
So it's a place of self-encounter, meeting himself in the fields of his memory. That's a powerful image.
It is, and he distinguishes between images received from the senses, like a scone or the sun, or remembering bodily pain, and the things themselves that are stored directly.
Things themselves, like what?
Like abstract concepts, literature, the art of disputing, how many kinds of questions there be. He marvels at how these abstract ideas, which were never received by the body's senses, are nevertheless present in memory. In my memory have I laid up not their images, but themselves.
Whoa, okay, so abstract concepts, logical principles, moral truth, these aren't just sensory inputs for him. They are directly present in memory. Not pictures of them, but the things themselves.
Exactly. And what's truly fascinating here is Augustine's recognition that memory isn't just this simple filing cabinet for sensory data. It holds abstract truths, concepts, and even our emotional history in a way that transcends simple physical recall. It's a profound early contribution to the philosophy of mind, suggesting memory is this active, complex faculty, not just a passive repository.
It sounds incredibly complex.
It is. He even explores the paradox of memory and affections. He asks, how is it that when with joy I remember my past sorrow, the mind hath joy, the memory hath sorrow? How can you feel joy now about a sorrow remembered from the past?
That's a great question. How does he explain it?
He uses the analogy of memory as the belly of the mind, where sweet and bitter food, joys and sadnesses are stored, but they cannot be tasted in the same way they were originally experienced, like food digested.
Interesting, Alan.
And he also grapples with the paradox of remembering forgetfulness. How can you remember forgetting something? How can something that effaces memory itself be remembered? This isn't just psychological observation. It's an early dive into the phenomenology of consciousness, anticipating much later philosophical and psychological inquiry.
That's a deep dive into the very nature of consciousness itself. Okay, so from this internal landscape of memory, Augustine moves to reflect on a universal human experience, the desire for a happy life.
Right, a fundamental human drive.
He argues that everyone universally desires a happy life, and this desire implies an innate, though perhaps dim, knowledge of what happiness actually is, a knowledge stored profoundly in memory. And then he defines a truly happy life as joy in the truth. For this is a joying in thee, who art the truth, O God, my light, health of my countenance, my God.
This is such a cornerstone of his thought and incredibly relevant, I think, to our constant search for fulfillment today. If happiness is universally desired, he argues, it must be universally known, even if faintly or subconsciously, by all human beings. The true happy life, for Augustine, isn't merely a transient pleasure or some fleeting satisfaction. It's an enduring state found only in the unchangeable truth, which he identifies with God himself. He argues, neither should we love it did we not know it. This innate knowledge, however faint or obscured by worldly pursuits it might be, it guides our yearning, even when we misdirect it towards lesser things.
And it really makes you think, doesn't it? Augustine posits that true happiness lies in joy in the truth. How does this deeply philosophical definition challenge our modern, often, let's face it, transient pursuit of happiness? What kind of truth might he be pointing us towards?
Well, he notes that all men desire this, but because the flesh lusteth against the spirit and the spirit against the flesh, that they cannot do what they would, there's an internal conflict.
Right, the struggle.
And he points out this fascinating paradox. Truth generates hatred, meaning people love truth when it enlightens them, but they hate it when it reproves them for loving something else instead of truth.
When the truth is uncomfortable.
Exactly. They would not be deceived, he says, and would deceive. They want the benefits of truth without its demands. He observes that people are ultimately unhappy because they are more strongly taken up with other things which have more power to make them miserable than that which they so faintly remember to make them happy.
Wow. That's a powerful insight into human resistance to truth, especially when it challenges our cherished illusions or maybe our comfortable vices.
It is. The desire for happiness is genuine, he thinks, but our fallen nature often leads us to seek it in mutable, self-deceiving ways, rather than in the unchangeable, sometimes uncomfortable truth. Augustine brilliantly shows how we often prefer a comforting lie to an inconvenient truth, even if that truth is the only path to genuine, lasting happiness.
It's a profound critique of self-deception, really. It has echoes in modern psychological theories, things like cognitive dissonance or motivated reasoning.
Very much so.
So after exploring memory and this universal desire for happiness, Augustine naturally turns to the question of finding God within this internal landscape, but also, paradoxically, beyond it. He asks, "Where in my memory residest thou, O Lord?"
A crucial question.
He describes passing beyond sensory images, beyond affections, beyond even the mind itself, realizing that God is the Lord God of the mind.
This is a profound philosophical and theological move. Augustine concludes that God is not simply a part of memory, nor an image, nor an affection, nor even the mind itself, because God is unchangeable. While all these human faculties and experiences are mutable, they change. God transcends all created things, including our internal landscape.
Okay, so God is beyond all that.
Yes. Yet in a beautiful paradox he states, "Sure I am, that in it thou dwellest, since I have remembered thee ever since I learnt thee, and there I find thee when I call thee to remembrance."
That's the incredible paradox, isn't it? God is in our memory because we learned him or learned of him, but he's also above me, transcending memory, giving audience to all. It points to this constant seeking and finding, a push and pull between the internal and the transcendent.
Exactly. He asks, "Where then did I find thee, that I might learn thee, but in thee above me? Place there is none. We go backward and forward, and there is no place." God isn't located in space or even in memory like an object.
Right.
But he continues, "Everywhere, O truth, dost thou give audience to all who ask counsel of thee, and at once answerest all, though on manifold matters they ask thy counsel." It's this beautiful image of God's omnipresence and responsiveness to the seeking heart found both within and beyond.
It feels like it culminates his intellectual quest by placing God not as an object within creation or even within the human mind, but as the transcendent ground of both.
Precisely. Yet paradoxically, God is also intimately present, discoverable through introspection, because he is the source of all being and truth. And this really sets the stage for his conversion, where this intellectual ascent translates into a profound, life-altering spiritual transformation, moving from just abstract understanding to a felt reality.
Which brings us to that pivotal embrace of faith in Augustine's life, his conversion, and the crucial role of grace. And we absolutely can't talk about this without highlighting his mother, Monica, her unwavering piety and powerful prayers. They stand out as just a central theme, almost a force of nature in the story.
Oh, Monica's role cannot be overstated. Augustine vividly describes her relentless prayers and tears for his conversion, calling them a sacrifice offered for me unto thee. He states she grieved for his spiritual death, more than mothers weep the bodily deaths of their children.
That's intense.
It is. She serves as this powerful symbol of persistent faith and motherly love, truly a conduit of God's grace in his life. And her dream. She had a dream about Augustine being where she was, on a rule, a measure of faith, at a time when he is still deep in Manichaeism, still outside the faith. This powerfully foreshadowed his eventual conversion, giving her deep spiritual reassurance amidst years and years of worry.
And her spiritual insight was quite remarkable too, wasn't it? Even for a devout person. He recounts how when he, in his youthful arrogance, tried to twist her dream to mean that she shouldn't despair of one day being where he was, philosophically speaking.
Right, he tried to flip it.
Yeah. She immediately countered, "No, for it was not told me that, where he, there thou also, but where thou, there he also." She saw the true meaning instantly.
Incredible clarity.
And even her persistence when he lied to her to sail to Rome, trying to escape her influence. It's astounding. He says, looking back, "Thou, O God, in the depth of thy counsels, and hearing the main point of her desire, regardest not what she then asked, that thou mightest make me what she ever asked."
So her specific prayer for him to stay was denied, but her deeper underlying prayer for his salvation was ultimately answered.
Exactly.
Stepping back, Monica's story really illustrates a profound theological point for Augustine. that God uses human instruments, like a mother's unceasing intercession, to work in wondrous ways, even when our immediate human desires don't align with his ultimate divine plan. Her unwavering faith is portrayed as this force that literally alters his destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And Augustine also highlights her exemplary life beyond just prayer, her peacemaking efforts in her community, how she patiently endured her choleric non-Christian husband, and her profound wisdom in advising of the wise. She urged patience and deference, even telling them to account them their marriage contracts as indentures, whereby they were made servants, illustrating a very pragmatic yet deeply faithful approach to difficult domestic situations back then. She was a living embodiment of the virtues she prayed her son would eventually embrace.
Beyond his mother, another significant figure in his intellectual and spiritual development was Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, a celebrated orator and theologian.
Yes, Ambrose played a truly crucial role. It was through Ambrose's preaching that Augustine first began to truly understand God as not bounded by human shape, which was absolutely instrumental in helping him shed those lingering Manichaean ideas about a corporeal God.
So Ambrose provided the intellectual key in a way.
He did. Ambrose's sermons, in his clear exposition of Scripture, helped unravel the crafty calumnies, as Augustine put it, that the Manichees had directed against the Old Testament, particularly. He showed Augustine how allegorical interpretation could make sense of passages that Manicheans had dismissed as crude or immoral. This offered a coherent and intellectually satisfying theological framework that Augustine desperately sought. Ambrose didn't just tell him what to believe, he showed him how to understand the faith intelligently.
Okay, so with these external influences aligning Monica's prayers pushing him, Ambrose's theology pulling him, Augustine was left to confront the profound internal battle, the battle of his two wills. This is such a powerful and, I think, relatable description of human inner conflict.
It really is.
He states, "My two wills, one new and the other old, one carnal, the other spiritual, struggle within me, and by their discord undid my soul." He explicitly recognizes the biblical truth that the flesh lusteth against the spirit and the spirit against the flesh.
This is a classic and deeply insightful exploration of that inner conflict, the struggle between a perceived good and the ingrained habits of sin. His powerful imagery of putting things off anon, soon, and just a little while. It illustrates the paralyzing effect of procrastination in spiritual matters.
We've all been there.
Absolutely. He highlights what he calls the violence of custom, whereby the mind is drawn and holden, even against its will. But deservedly, for that it willingly fell into it. This speaks to the immense difficulty of breaking free from established patterns, even when you intellectually know the better path. It's the profound inertia of habit, where past choices create this momentum that feels almost impossible to stop on your own.
So this isn't just about good versus evil in some abstract sense. It's about the inertia of habit, the way our past choices create a sort of law of sin, as Paul called it, that holds us captive, even when our minds know better. It shows how profoundly ingrained our patterns of behavior and thought can become, almost like chains we forged ourselves.
Precisely. And he even debunks the Manichaean idea of two separate souls fighting within him by showing that even with purely bad wills, a person can be conflicted. For example, someone might deliberate between killing by poison or by sword, or choosing between different vices like luxury and covetousness.
So conflict exists even within evil choices.
Right. And similarly, conflicting good wills, like wanting to read the Apostle Paul versus wanting to discourse on the gospel, can also distract and divide the mind. This internal division, therefore, is inherent to the single human condition, a sign of our brokenness, not evidence of two distinct warring substances within us.
That's a crucial insight. It refutes that simplistic, dualistic idea. The conflict isn't between two independent entities, but within the single human soul, demonstrating this profound internal brokenness, a misalignment of the will.
Exactly. And it cannot simply be attributed to some external evil force or a separate soul. This psychological depth really sets the stage for his understanding that true deliverance, true healing, must come from outside the self. It has to come from divine grace, because the will is so profoundly damaged, it cannot simply pull itself up by its own bootstraps.
And indeed, his ultimate breakthrough, his conversion experience, comes not through sheer willpower or intellectual assent alone, but through what he understands as divine grace. He recounts that transformative moment in a garden in Milan.
It's a famous garden scene.
Yes. Hearing a child's voice chanting, "Tolly, lives, take up and read," he picked up Paul's epistles and read a passage that spoke directly to his struggle with lust and worldly living. And he describes immediately being able to cast off the toys of his former life, finding a new, unexpected sweetness in God.
He says, "How sweet did it at once become to me to want the sweetnesses of those toys, and what I feared to be parted from was now a joy to part with. For thou didst cast them forth from me, thou true and highest sweetness."
It's such a powerful description of liberation.
It vividly emphasizes the transformative power of grace and that decisive shift from self-will to divine will. "It was this thy whole gift," he states, "to nill what I willed and to will what thou willedst, to not want what I used to want and to want what God wants."
A complete reorientation.
A complete reorientation of his will, not by his own strength, but by God's direct, merciful intervention through grace. This marks the true beginning of his new life, and he points to the true mediator, the man Christ Jesus, as the bridge between mortal sinners and the immortal God, embodying both human mortality and divine righteousness to offer salvation, thereby providing the means for this grace to take effect. It's really a testament to the power of a heart truly yielded to a higher power.
Having found his spiritual anchor in this profound internal peace, Augustine then turns his incredible intellect to more abstract elements of God's creation, particularly the enigma of time itself. This is another famous part of the Confessions.
Book 11, yeah. Deeply philosophical.
He poses the fundamental paradoxical question, what then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it to one that asks, I know not.
So relatable.
Isn't it? He highlights the logical absurdity that the past is not now, the future is not yet, and the present has no space because it flies with such speed from future to past. This is a question that has honestly plagued philosophers for millennia.
It's a classic passage, revealing the depth of human experience when we confront seemingly simple concepts like time. His analysis fundamentally challenges our everyday intuitive perception of time as some kind of external objective river flowing independently of us.
So what does he suggest instead?
He suggests that time is not an external reality existing independently, but is rather a protraction of the mind itself. Distentio animi.
A protraction, a stretching out of the mind.
Exactly. This is a crucial point because it means we measure time as it passes, and our mind is what experiences this passage through its faculties of expectation, looking forward, attention or consideration, focusing on the present moment, and memory, looking back.
So time is subjective, internal.
In a profound way, yes. This raises that important question. What does it mean for time to be a protraction of the mind, and what are the implications for our daily lives? Augustine is suggesting that our experience of time is deeply subjective, tied to our internal states, rather than being some external objective measurement ticking away.
Okay, so if our perception of past, present, and future is fundamentally an internal mental construct rather than just an external clock, how does that change things? Our relationship with regret or anticipation or even just daily deadlines?
Well, it suggests a profound inner power, perhaps, to shape our experience of temporality. It suggests our feeling of time, whether it flies or drags, is deeply connected to our internal state.
He uses that beautiful and incredibly detailed analogy of reciting a song to explain this, right?
Yes, it's brilliant. He says, "Before I begin, my expectation is extended over the whole psalm. But when I have begun, how much soever of it I shall separate off into the past is extended along my memory. Thus the life of this action of mine is divided between my memory as to what I have repeated and expectation as to what I am about to repeat. But consideration or attention is present with me, that through it what was future may be conveyed over so as to become past."
Wow. That's not just poetic, it's a profound psychological observation about how we experience duration.
It really is.
Yeah.
And he applies this idea not just to a single action like reciting a psalm, but to individual human lives, our past being memory, our future expectation, our present consideration, and even to the entire age of humankind.
This subjective understanding of time, it profoundly links it to human consciousness and experience. It feels remarkably modern-sounding, anticipating later philosophical thought on temporality by thinkers like Kant or Heidegger, maybe, who explored how time is constitutive of our human existence.
Absolutely. Augustine places the measurement of time firmly within the mind as an act of awareness and attention rather than a mere external clock. This means our subjective experience of time, whether it feels like it's flying or dragging, is really a function of our internal state. Our attention, our memories, our anticipations is an invitation to recognize the profound psychological dimension of something we often just take for granted as purely objective.
And this leads him naturally to consider God's relationship to time. How does God fit into this?
Well, Augustine emphatically states that God is before all times, the eternal creator of all times. And crucially, that no times be co-eternal with thee. God exists outside of time.
Outside of time altogether.
Yes. And God created out of nothing, creatio ex nihilo, meaning creation from nothing, not from some pre-existing matter or co-eternal forces like the Manichaeans might have suggested.
Okay. So God isn't in time, and time itself is part of his creation.
Exactly. This clarifies the profound distinction between divine eternity, which is immutable, unchanging, and transcends time, and created time, which is temporal, mutable, and a feature of the creation. God's knowledge and will aren't subject to the fleeting nature of time. As Augustine says, no mutable thing is eternal, but our God is eternal. God doesn't experience before or after in the way we do. All of time is eternally present to him in a single, unchanging moment.
That's mind-bending.
It is. But it's crucial for understanding God's nature as utterly transcendent and independent of his creation. The concept of creatio ex nihilo means that not only are all things created, but time itself is part of that creation, emphasizing God's absolute sovereignty over everything.
He delves into the Genesis account to further illustrate this, doesn't he? Interpreting, in the beginning God made heaven and earth.
Yes, he offers a fascinating reading. He suggests that the heaven of heavens mentioned in Scripture refers to an intellectual creature, perhaps the angels, which, though not co-eternal with God, partakes of God's eternity by continually and unfailingly cleaving unto thee, constantly beholding God's face, and thereby suffering no changeableness of times.
So the angels are outside time or less subject to it because of their closeness to God.
That's his interpretation. And the earth, invisible and without form, refers to primitive, formless matter, also created outside of time's days, because, as he argues, where no figure nor order is, there does nothing come or go. And where this is not, there plainly are no days. Time begins with the ordering of creation.
That interpretive move allows him to reconcile the biblical creation narrative with his philosophical understanding of God's timelessness. He's positing different levels of creation, maybe. Some closer to God's eternity, like the intellectual creatures, while others are more subject to the successive changes of time, like the visible earth and us.
It's a highly sophisticated reading of Scripture, integrating philosophical insights about time and eternity with theological truths about God's creative act. It emphasizes again that the very fabric of time is a created reality, not an eternal one.
So Augustine's journey through the Genesis text isn't about rigid, literal interpretation as much as it is about finding these profound theological truths about God's eternal nature and the inherent goodness and order of his creation. He reflects on, God saw everything that thou hadst made, and behold, it was very good. And he points out that individually things were good, but altogether both good and very good, emphasizing the harmonious whole of creation.
Right. And what's fascinating here, I think, is Augustine's surprisingly modern founding approach to biblical interpretation. He really advocates for understanding Scripture broadly, recognizing that many true meanings can often be extracted from a single passage.
So not just one single literal meaning.
Not necessarily the only meaning. He states that he would prefer to write or interpret so that whatever truth any could apprehend on those matters might be conveyed in my words, rather than limiting it to a single narrow meaning he might personally favor.
That sounds quite open-minded.
It is. He advises against contentious arguments over, say, Moses' principal meaning, prioritizing instead charity itself for whose sake he spake everything. And he acknowledges that God, in his wisdom, can temper holy scriptures to the senses of many who should see therein things true but divers. Different people might grasp different valid truths from the same text.
Wow. That encourages a generous and open-minded engagement with sacred texts, recognizing the divine wisdom in their multi-layered meanings, seeking understanding rather than dogmatic certainty on every single detail. That approach must have profoundly shaped later Christian interpretation.
It absolutely did. It shaped Christian hermeneutics for centuries.
Now, even after his conversion and these profound intellectual breakthroughs, Augustine's journey wasn't just over. He recognized that life itself is an ongoing journey, a perpetual trial that requires constant effort and, importantly, divine grace.
The struggle continues.
He openly confesses, "Is not the life of man upon earth all trial?" He describes lamentable joys, striving with joyous sorrows, and this constant tension between longing for prosperity when you're in adversity and then fearing adversity when you're in prosperity.
A very human cycle.
Totally. Woe to the prosperities of the world, he says, once and again, through fear of adversity and corruption of joy. Woe to the adversities of the world, from the longing for prosperity. It captures that dissatisfaction perfectly.
It paints a deeply realistic picture of the human condition, doesn't it? A continuous struggle that absolutely requires divine grace. He emphasizes that no man loves what he endures, though he love to endure, highlighting the inherent difficulty of embracing hardship for its own sake, even if we know it might be beneficial.
Right. And his prayer reflects this need for divine assistance. Give what thou enjoinest, and enjoin what thou wilt. Thou enjoinest us continency. Give me the strength to do what you command.
Exactly. It acknowledges the human need for divine assistance in living a virtuous life, openly confessing personal weakness and the inability to achieve true virtue by mere willpower alone. It's a recognition of the ongoing need for God's grace, even for the converted soul. It's not a one-and-done thing.
And he also highlights his ongoing struggles with most petty and contemptible things, like simple curiosity getting the better of him watching a lizard catching flies or a spider entangling them when he should be praying or working.
Yeah, the small distractions.
Totally. And he confronts the temptation of people pleasing themselves in themselves, taking pride in their own virtue, which he notes much displease thee, God. And that deep desire to be feared and loved of men for no other end, but that we may have a joy therein, which is no joy. Seeking validation from others.
These are crucial details because they emphasize that conversion is an ongoing process of purification and vigilance, not some single event that magically eradicates all struggle. Even after his major spiritual turning point, he still battles these subtler daily temptations.
Like the desire for human praise.
Exactly. That can be a particularly insidious trap, distracting from God's truth and leading to a false sense of self-worth based on others' opinions. He notes, our daily furnace is the tongue of men, revealing how constant the temptation for external validation is and how easily our pride can be inflamed or subtly compromised by what other people say about us.
It really makes you think about how often we get distracted by trivial things, lose focus, or maybe seek validation and praise from others, and the inherent emptiness that can accompany those pursuits. Augustine struggles to examine himself honestly in this area of praise. He asks, how know I whether I am therefore thus affected by praise? Because I would not have him who praiseth me differ from me about myself, not as being influenced by concern for him, but because those same good things which please me in myself please me more when they please another also.
It's an incredibly nuanced, almost painfully honest self-assessment of the subtle motivations behind seeking external affirmation. Is it really about the other person, or is it just confirming my own good opinion of myself?
Yeah, it's deep self-reflection.
It demonstrates the relentless internal work that Augustine believed was necessary even for the converted soul, this constant vigilance against pride and self-deception that can subtly undermine genuine virtue.
In this final section of the Confessions, Augustine returns, very movingly, to the profound influence of his mother, Monica. He recounts her serene death near Ostia as they are preparing to return to Africa.
A very powerful scene.
And her poignant final request. She told her sons not to worry about burying her body back in Africa, but simply, this only I request, that you would remember me at the Lord's altar wherever you be.
Focused on prayer, not earthly remains.
Exactly. And he also notes her profound faith in the resurrection, saying, nothing is far to God, nor was it to be feared lest at the end of the world he should not recognize whence he were to raise me up. God knows where she is. He remembers her holy conversation towards thee, her holy tenderness and observance towards us.
Stepping back, Monica's death, while obviously bringing Augustine deep sorrow, also provokes profound reflection on faith, on resurrection, and on the enduring power of prayer. His heartfelt intercession for her sins after her death shows his humility and a deep understanding of grace.
He prays for her, even though she was so devout.
Yes. He emphasizes that her salvation wasn't based on her real merits alone, though they were many, but ultimately on God's gifts and mercy through Christ. He prays, let thy mercy be exalted above thy justice, since thy words are true, and thou hast promised mercy unto the merciful. He recalls her binding her soul by the bond of faith to the sacrament of which our ransom, the Eucharist, symbolizing her complete trust in Christ's saving power, not her own perfection.
That adds another layer to her legacy.
It does. Her passing is a testament to a life lived utterly in faith, leaving this powerful legacy of perseverance and trust in God's ultimate plan, right to the very end.
It's a beautiful and tender moment, highlighting the enduring bond of familial love, but transformed by faith. And throughout this entire work, this whole confession, the overarching message seems to be one of hope and ultimate fulfillment found in turning towards God. Augustine affirms God's constant presence and help. Thou alone rest. He encourages the reader, implicitly himself too, saying, God is at hand, and deliverest us from our wretched wanderings, and placest us in thy way, and dost comfort us, and say, Run, I will carry you. Yea, I will bring you through, there also will I carry you.
And that's really the ultimate takeaway, isn't it? The profound conclusion of his deeply personal journey. Augustine's personal narrative becomes a testament to the universal path to peace, reminding us that we are saved by hope. He powerfully concludes this profound reflection by stating, My life is but a distraction, until I flow together into thee, purified and molten by the fire of thy love.
Wow, molten by the fire of thy love.
It's a recognition that true rest and coherence for the fragmented human soul can only be found in its creator, in union with God.
So what does this all mean for us then? Centuries removed from Augustine's world, Augustine's life, as he confesses it here, it feels like a profound testament to the power of relentless self-examination, the transformative nature of grace, and the constant, often challenging journey towards genuine understanding and peace, ultimately finding rest, as he says, in God.
Absolutely. Stepping back, what really stands out here is that this deep dive isn't just about ancient history or theology for specialists. It's like a blueprint for understanding our own internal landscapes and the universal human quest for meaning and connection. A quest that Augustine found ultimately pointed towards and was fulfilled in the unchangeable truth, which he identified as God.
So it invites us to do the same.
I think so. His confessions invite us to undertake our own confession, in a way, to honestly confront our desires, our struggles, our deepest longings, and to really consider where true and lasting fulfillment might actually lie for us. It's a call to profound, authentic introspection that remains just as relevant today as it was back in the 4th century.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Augustine's Confessions. It's a truly rich and, as you say, relevant text that continues to offer profound insights into these enduring human questions.
It really does.
Augustine wrestled with these profound questions about evil, the elusive nature of time, the purpose of memory, the very nature of God, ultimately concluding that true happiness lies in joy in the truth. So, as you reflect on your own journey, maybe ask yourself, what truths are you most deeply striving for? And perhaps more challengingly, are you willing to let them reshape your understanding of yourself and the world around you, leading you towards a peace that, as Augustine cryptically puts it, the eye of the proud knoweth not?
A powerful thought to end on.
Keep seeking, keep